The oncologist's words were still echoing in my head when Mom checked her phone for the third time in 5 minutes. Stage 2 Hodgkin's lymphoma, Dr. Peterson had said. Very treatable. We'll start aggressive chemotherapy next Thursday. The first session is critical for establishing your baseline and adjusting the protocol. I was 21 years old, sitting in an oncology office, trying to process the word cancer while my parents scrolled through their phones. Thursday, Dad looked up. What time? 9 in the morning, Dr. Peterson said. Plan for the whole day. The first infusion takes 6 to 8 hours, and we need to monitor her closely. Mom and Dad exchanged a look I couldn't quite read. We'll make it work, Mom said, but her voice had that distant quality it got when she was already planning something else. In the car, Dad drove while Mom made a phone call. Yes, we'll definitely be there, she said into her phone. Wouldn't miss it. Bob's been talking about this wedding for months. My stomach dropped. Bob was Dad's coworker, the division manager who controlled promotions and assignments. Mom, I started. She held up a finger, still talking. The venue looks gorgeous in the photos. We're looking forward to it. She hung up and turned to me. Your father and I have an important event Thursday. Bob Harrison's daughter is getting married. The whole executive team will be there. My chemotherapy is Thursday. We know, honey, Dad said, eyes on the road. But this is a significant networking opportunity. Bob specifically invited us. He doesn't do that for everyone. It's my first cancer treatment. And you'll have many more, Mom said. The doctor said it's very treatable. One appointment isn't going to make or break anything. You can take an Uber to the hospital. I stared at her. An Uber to chemotherapy? Or ask a friend, she suggested. What about Jessica from work? Jessica is my coworker, not my cancer treatment support system. Sarah, don't be dramatic. Dad's voice had that edge that meant the discussion was over. We've been planning to attend this wedding for weeks. Your diagnosis doesn't change Bob's timeline. Networking matters more than one appointment. This could determine my next promotion. I looked out the window and said nothing. What was there to say? My parents had just told me that a coworker's wedding outranked my cancer treatment. That Thursday morning, I took an Uber to the hospital alone. The driver tried to make small talk until he saw where he was dropping me off. Then he went quiet. That uncomfortable silence people get around cancer patients. The infusion center was cold and sterile, filled with recliners where people my grandmother's age sat hooked up to IV poles. I was the youngest person there by at least 30 years. They gave me a heated blanket and inserted an IV into my arm. The port surgery was scheduled for next week, they explained. For now, they use a regular IV. The needle's pinch felt like nothing compared to the ache of arriving alone. Is someone coming to sit with you? The nurse asked, her voice gentle. The first treatment can be rough. Most patients bring family. Parents usually for someone your age. They had a wedding, I said. She gave me a look I'd see many times over the next 6 months. Pity mixed with confusion, mixed with something that looked like anger on my behalf. The look that said your family should be here, that said this is wrong, that said I'm sorry, but I can't fix this for you. The chemicals dripped into my veins for 7 hours. I watched them flow through the clear tubes, red and toxic and hopefully healing. I imagined them attacking the cancer in my lymph nodes, pictured them like tiny soldiers fighting a war inside my body. I tried not to think about my parents dancing at a wedding reception, tried not to wonder if they'd thought about me at all between the ceremony and the cake cutting, tried not to calculate the exact moment when the cocktail hour began and my infusion started, when they were toasting with champagne and I was trying not to throw up into a plastic basin. They came home at 11 that night, laughing about the open bar and the ice sculpture. How was it? Mom asked, kicking off her heels. Fine, I said. I was lying on the couch, nauseous and exhausted, but I'd learned something important that day. They weren't going to change, so I would. Over the next 6 months, the pattern repeated. My second infusion fell on the same day as Dad's company golf tournament. The third conflicted with Mom's department dinner. They made the fourth treatment, but Mom spent the entire time on work calls in the hallway. When my hair started falling out in clumps, I shaved it myself in the bathroom at 2 in the morning. When I couldn't keep food down for 3 days straight, I researched anti-nausea remedies online. When the port surgery left me unable to lift my arm for a week, I figured out how to dress myself one-handed. I made every appointment alone, every scan, every blood draw, every consultation where doctors discussed whether the treatment was working. I took notes on my phone, asked questions, and became my own best advocate because I had to. My parents paid the insurance copays and considered their obligation fulfilled. They mentioned my cancer at work, collecting sympathy and understanding when they needed to leave early or take calls. But they never actually left early. They never actually took the calls. The week I finished chemotherapy, my final scan showed complete remission. Dr. Peterson hugged me, tears in her eyes. "You did it," she said. "You beat it." I called my parents from the hospital parking lot. Mom answered on the fourth ring. "That's wonderful, honey. We're so proud. Listen, I'm in a meeting. Can we celebrate this weekend?" We never did celebrate. The weekend came and went with them attending a retirement party for one of Dad's colleagues. But I celebrated privately. I celebrated by making decisions. I was 22, cancer-free, and done waiting for my parents to prioritize me. I had kept taking online courses throughout treatment, studying between nausea waves, completing assignments in hospital waiting rooms. Now I doubled down. I finished my degree in 18 months, working remotely for a tech startup while my body regained its strength. The startup's founder noticed my work ethic, my attention to detail, my ability to show up even when things were hard, especially when things were hard. "You're different from other junior employees," he told me during my 6-month review. "You don't complain. You don't make excuses. You just solve problems." Where does that come from? Cancer had taught me that. When you can't rely on anyone else, you figure things out. When calling for help means calling people who won't come, you learn to help yourself. I was 24 when I made my first real money. The startup went through a successful Series B funding round, and my stock options suddenly had actual value. Not life-changing money, but enough to feel secure, to stop worrying about medical bill copays. I was 26 when we were acquired by a larger tech company. My payout was enough to start my own venture, enough to never feel financially vulnerable again. My parents knew I worked in tech. They didn't know the specifics. I didn't share them. "How's the computer job?" Dad would ask on the rare occasions I visited. "Fine," I'd say, the same answer I'd given about chemotherapy. I moved across the country, built my company carefully, methodically, hired people who showed up, created a culture where personal crises mattered, where employees could bring their whole selves to work, including the messy parts. My company grew. We hit 10 million in revenue, then 50, then 100. Tech journalists started calling me a rising star. Forbes mentioned me in an article about founders under 35. I was 31 when my mother called. "Sarah, honey, it's been so long." Her voice had changed, older, uncertain. "We need to talk about something important." "I'm busy, Mom." "It's about your father's medical bills." I stopped walking. I was on my way to a board meeting, wearing a suit that cost more than my parents had spent on my entire cancer treatment UVer budget. "What about them?" "He needs some procedures. The insurance doesn't cover everything. And our retirement accounts aren't where we thought they'd be. All those years of networking, but the pension changes hit us hard." "How much do you need?" "Maybe $5,000 a month, just until we get situated. We know you're doing well with your little tech thing." My little tech thing. The company I'd built was valued at $200 million. "Let me think about it," I said. That night, I did think about it. I thought about being 21 years old, bald and vomiting, taking an Uber to the hospital. I thought about my parents dancing at a wedding while chemicals dripped into my veins. I thought about every appointment I'd attended alone, every scan result I'd processed by myself, every terrifying moment when I'd wondered if I was going to die and if my parents would even notice. I didn't call them back. Mom called again a week later. "Sarah, did you think about it? Your father's first procedure is scheduled." I did think about it. And no. Silence. Then, carefully, "What do you mean no?" "I mean I'm not giving you money." "But we're your parents. We raised you, supported you through college." "You supported me through college. You did not support me through cancer." "That's not fair. We were there. You attended 4 out of 12 chemotherapy sessions. You missed my port surgery. You went to a golf tournament instead of my second infusion. You celebrated a coworker's retirement instead of my remission. We had obligations. So do I. And my obligation isn't to fund the retirement of people who told me networking mattered more than my cancer treatment." "Sarah, that's not what that's exactly what you said." Dad said those exact words. "Networking matters more than one appointment." Another long silence. We didn't know you'd remember that. I remembered everything, Mom. Every wedding, every golf game, every dinner party. Every time you chose work events over your daughter's cancer treatment. I remembered all of it. You survived. The treatment worked. So what's the problem? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with everything they still didn't understand. What's the problem? As if survival erased abandonment. As if not dying meant I shouldn't have needed them. As if the absence of death somehow justified the absence of love. The problem, I said slowly, each word deliberate, is that you think I should be grateful I didn't die alone, when the real question is why I had to face dying alone in the first place. Why your 21-year-old daughter sat through 7 hours of chemotherapy by herself because you were networking over shrimp cocktails. We need help, Sarah. Medical bills, retirement, living expenses. We heard you're successful now. We saw an article about you online. Some tech company worth millions? That profile in Forbes last month? So they had researched me, finally taking an interest in my life, reading articles about my company, learning my net worth from business journalists instead of asking me directly. Finally paying attention, now that it could benefit them. $200 million, I said. My company is valued at $200 million. I personally own 40% of it. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought she'd hung up. $80 million? Her voice came out as a whisper. You're worth $80 million? Give or take, depends on the market. Then you can certainly help us. $5,000 a month is nothing to you. You're right, it's nothing to me. The same way my cancer treatment was nothing to you. One appointment, remember? Not worth missing a wedding for. Sarah, please. We're your parents. You were my parents, past tense. You stopped being my parents the day you chose Bob Harrison's daughter's wedding over my first chemotherapy. You just didn't realize it yet. You can't do this. We're family. Family shows up. You taught me that by not showing up. And I learned the lesson perfectly. I'm not showing up now. I hung up before she could respond. Blocked both their numbers, blocked their email addresses, and updated my emergency contacts to remove their names. My assistant knocked on my office door an hour later. Your mother is on the main line. She says it's urgent. Add her to the blocked caller list, please. Of course. Anything else? Yes. Make sure our employee benefits package includes comprehensive cancer treatment support, full coverage, transportation services, and mandatory paid time off for family members attending appointments. She nodded, making notes. That's generous. It's baseline decency, I said. No one should face cancer alone because their family had somewhere better to be. That evening, I looked at my calendar. 10 years since the diagnosis. 10 years since my parents chose networking over my cancer treatment. 10 years I'd spent building something they knew nothing about. I'd survived, not because of them, but despite them. And I'd succeeded the same way. Alone, on purpose, by choice. They left voicemails on my work line for weeks, then months. I had them forwarded directly to spam. Eventually, they stopped. I heard through a distant cousin that they'd downsized their house, that Dad had taken a part-time consulting job to cover expenses, that they told people their daughter was too busy and important to help her own parents. They were right. I was too busy building a company that treated employees like humans, too busy creating a workplace where people could bring their parents to chemotherapy without fear. Too busy making sure no one who worked for me ever had to choose between family and networking. My parents had made their choice 10 years ago at a coworker's wedding. They chose networking. They chose advancement. They chose everything except me. Now I was choosing too. I chose success. I chose a life they weren't part of. I chose to be exactly what they'd taught me to be, someone who prioritized business over family. They just never expected to be on the receiving end of their own lesson. 10 years after they skipped my cancer treatment, I left them behind, not with anger, not with regret, just with the same casual prioritization they'd shown me. After all, they taught me well. Some things matter more than family obligations, like showing up for yourself when no one else will. My name is Sophia, and I live in Austin, Texas. I grew up here, in a city where the sunsets are golden and the air is thick with music and opportunity. My life wasn't perfect, but I always believed I had the strength to make something of myself. I met David when I was 20, young and full of dreams, and for a while, I thought he was the answer to all my prayers. We fell in love quickly, or at least I thought we did. He was kind, charming, and everything I thought I wanted in a partner. But looking back now, I wonder if I was so eager to escape my small apartment and my struggling early 20s life that I ignored the red flags, especially the one waving from his mother, Karen. Karen hated me from the moment David brought me home to meet her. She had this way of looking at me, like I was something she had to scrape off her shoe. It didn't matter how polite I was, how much effort I put into getting her approval. She was cold, dismissive, and at times downright cruel. I remember one Thanksgiving just a month after David and I got married. I spent hours cooking a meal for the whole family, wanting so badly to impress her. When I proudly brought out the turkey, Karen leaned over to David and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, "Well, at least she can cook. She certainly isn't bringing anything else to the table." I was humiliated, but David brushed it off, saying, "That's just how Mom is. Don't take it personally." But it was personal. Everything she did was personal. She would criticize my clothes, mock my career aspirations, and tell David that I wasn't good enough for him. And when none of that worked to drive a wedge between us, she started lying. She told David that I was lazy, ungrateful, and worst of all, that I treated her like a maid. The day she made that accusation was the day my marriage began to crumble. I walked into the living room, overhearing her telling David, "Sophia thinks she's the queen of this house, making me do all the cleaning and cooking while she sits around." It was a complete lie, and she knew it. When I tried to defend myself, David didn't believe me. He just stood there, silent, while his mother glared at me with that smug satisfaction, knowing she'd finally gotten what she wanted. It wasn't long after that when David told me to leave. No discussion, no attempt to work things out, just, "You need to go." I left that house with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. And yet, as I walked away, I told myself this wasn't the end. It couldn't be. It's been 5 years since that day. 5 years since I walked out of David's house, leaving behind my old life, my broken marriage, and every ounce of love I thought I had for him. At first it was hard, so hard that I wasn't sure I could make it. I crashed on a friend's couch for a while, worked 2 jobs, and cried myself to sleep more nights than I can count. But little by little, I rebuilt myself. I went back to school, got my degree, and eventually landed a job in marketing at a firm here in Austin. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I made new friends, people who saw me for who I was and supported me in ways David never had. I even started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. My tiny apartment became my sanctuary, full of bright canvases, potted plants, and the kind of peace I never thought I'd have. Life was good. No, life was great. I was happy, independent, and for the first time, free from the weight of trying to prove myself to anyone. I hadn't spoken to David since the divorce. As far as I was concerned, that chapter of my life was closed. So when my phone rang one Friday evening and I saw David's name on the screen, it felt like the air had been knocked out of me. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to just let it go to voicemail and pretend I hadn't seen it. But curiosity, or maybe some lingering masochistic instinct, got the better of me. I picked up. His voice was shaky, panicked even. "Sophia," he started. I didn't know who else to call. Hearing his voice again after all these years was jarring. For a moment, I couldn't respond. All I could manage was, "David, what's going on?" And then it all came pouring out. Karen had passed away. Cancer, he said. She'd been sick for years, apparently, but I had no idea. Not that I would have. We'd had no contact since the divorce. He told me how he'd spent everything on her treatments, trying to give her the best care he could. He sold his car, drained his savings, and took out loans just to keep her comfortable in her final days. And now, with her gone, he was left with nothing. No money, no job stable enough to cover his mounting bills, and rent past due. His voice cracked as he explained that he was at risk of losing the house. "I don't even have enough for groceries right now," he admitted, his desperation palpable. I sat there in stunned silence, gripping the phone like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Part of me felt for him. Losing a parent is never easy, and I knew how much he loved his mother, no matter how toxic she had been. But another part of me, maybe a bigger part, felt cold, detached. What does this have to do with me? I wanted to ask. "Sophia," he continued, "I know I don't deserve your help after everything, but I'm begging you. I'm drowning here." I could hear the strain in his voice, the weight of everything he'd been carrying. And for a split second, I felt a pang of guilt. After all, this was someone I had once loved, someone I had promised to spend my life with. But then I remembered. I remembered the nights I spent crying, the way he had turned his back on me when I needed him most, and the years I spent clawing my way out of the hole he and his mother had thrown me into. David, I said slowly, choosing my words carefully, I'm really sorry for what you're going through. But I don't think I'm the person you should be calling for this. He didn't seem to hear me, or maybe he chose not to. Please, he said again, his voice breaking. I just need a little help to get back on my feet. Anything you can give, money, a place to stay, just until I figure things out. The audacity of it all hit me like a wave. This man, who had cast me out of his life without a second thought, was now asking me to save him. It was almost laughable. But instead of laughing, I felt my chest tighten with anger. I don't think you understand, I said, my voice firmer now. When you kicked me out, you made it clear that I wasn't part of your family. You didn't believe me when your mother lied about me. You chose her over me every single time, and now you want me to swoop in and fix everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then quietly, he said, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I'm desperate, Sophia, please. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of his words settle over me. Desperate or not, I couldn't ignore the fact that this was the same man who had let me walk away with nothing. The same man who hadn't once reached out in the years since, not to apologize, not to check in, nothing. And now, here he was asking me to save him from the consequences of his own choices. I took a deep breath and said, I'm sorry, David. I can't help you. He started to protest, but I cut him off. I've spent the last 5 years rebuilding my life. I worked hard to get where I am, and I won't let you drag me back into your chaos. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the rush of finally standing up for myself. For once, I wasn't the one bending, sacrificing, or trying to fix things. And it felt good. Liberating even. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on my balcony, and watched the city lights flicker in the distance. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace. When I hung up the phone that first night, I thought that was the end of it. I had said my piece, stood my ground, and drawn a line. But David didn't stop. The calls started coming more frequently, each one more desperate than the last. At first, I ignored them. Then I blocked his number. But somehow, he found other ways to get through, emails, mutual friends, even showing up at my office once. Sophia, I'm begging you, he pleaded, standing in the lobby of my building while I stood frozen, trying not to let my coworkers see the mess unfolding. You're the only person who can help me right now. I felt like I was being pulled in two directions. On one hand, I hated him for what he'd done to me, for how easily he'd discarded me when his mother poisoned his mind. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the guilt. The part of me that still remembered what it felt like to love him, to want to make him happy, whispered that maybe I should help. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the emails he'd sent. Each one was the same. Long, rambling, full of apologies that felt hollow and pleas for help that felt manipulative. He talked about how much he regretted what had happened, how he missed me, how he knew he didn't deserve my forgiveness, but hoped I could find it in my heart to help him. But the guilt wasn't the only thing I felt. There was also anger, a deep, simmering rage that had been building for years. How dare he come back into my life after everything? How dare he expect me to clean up his mess when he hadn't lifted a finger to help me during the hardest time of my life? I couldn't sleep that night, torn between the person I used to be and the person I had become. The old Sophia, the one who bent over backward to make everyone happy, whispered that helping him might bring me closure. But the new Sophia, the one who had clawed her way out of the pit he'd thrown her into, screamed, enough. The final straw came a week later when he showed up at my apartment. I opened the door to find him standing there, disheveled and tired, holding a box of old photos and mementos from our marriage. I thought these might remind you of what we had, he said, his voice soft and pitiful. I couldn't help it. I laughed, a sharp, bitter laugh that startled even me. You really think showing up here with some old junk is going to change anything? I said, crossing my arms. He looked taken aback, like he hadn't expected me to respond that way. Sophia, I'm trying to show you that I'm serious. I've changed. Change? I said, my voice rising. You haven't changed, David. You're still the same person who threw me out when I needed you. You're still trying to manipulate me into fixing your life because you can't face the consequences of your own choices. And you think I'm the selfish one." He flinched at that, but I wasn't done. Years of pent-up anger and frustration came pouring out. "Do you even realize what you're asking of me? Do you know how hard I worked to get where I am, to build a life without you and your toxic mother? You had your chance, David, and you blew it. Now you want me to feel guilty because you're finally facing the fallout of your own actions. Well, I don't. Not anymore." His face twisted with something between anger and disbelief. "You've become so cold, Sophia, so selfish." That made me laugh again, a real full-bodied laugh this time. "Selfish? No, David. Selfish was expecting me to sacrifice everything for you and your mother while you gave me nothing in return. Selfish was throwing me out of our home without a second thought. Standing up for myself isn't selfish, it's survival." For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him. And maybe he didn't. Maybe the Sophia he thought he knew would have caved, would have felt sorry for him and opened her wallet or her home or her heart. But that Sophia was gone. "I think you should leave," I said finally, my voice steady. He opened his mouth to argue but seemed to think better of it. Without another word, he turned and walked away, the box of memories still in his hands. When I closed the door, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I had stood up for myself completely, without guilt, without second-guessing, without apologizing. And it felt incredible. After David walked out of my life for the second time, I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't known before. It wasn't just about him, it was about me. About finally choosing myself over the people who had drained me for so long. That weekend, I hosted a small dinner at my apartment with friends who had become my family. We laughed, shared stories, and toasted to new beginnings. My walls were adorned with my paintings, bright, messy bursts of color that felt like a reflection of the life I'd built. As I sat there, surrounded by warmth and love, I realized how far I'd come. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. I had a career I loved, people who lifted me up, and a peace that came from knowing I had stood my ground. I didn't need David or Karen or anyone else who tried to dim my light. I was enough, just as I was. And for the first time in years, I felt truly, completely whole. My name is Rebecca, and I live in Seattle, Washington. Growing up, I used to think life was supposed to be hard, until I saw how easy it was for my stepsister, Lily. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, while I was the shadow everyone seemed to forget existed. When my mom passed away, I was just 8 years old. My dad remarried within a year, and that's when everything changed. My stepmom, Karen, came into our lives with her perfect smile and sugary sweet words, but it didn't take long for her true colors to show. To her, I wasn't her stepdaughter, I was free labor. By the time I was 10, I was cleaning the house, cooking meals, and running errands like I was a full-time maid. Rebecca, set the table. Rebecca, do Lily's laundry. Rebecca, why isn't the floor spotless? It didn't matter how much I tried or how tired I was. It was never enough. Meanwhile, Lily got to play with her friends, go to dance classes, and wear the prettiest dresses Karen could afford. Karen would gush over Lily at every opportunity. "Look at my sweet girl. She's so talented, so beautiful, so smart." And then there was me, the invisible one, unless I messed up. Then I was a disrespectful brat, or lazy, or just like your mother, said with a sneer that cut deeper than anything else. I used to dream about what life would have been like if my mom were still alive. Maybe she would have protected me, stood up for me. Maybe I wouldn't have felt so small in a house where my presence seemed more like an inconvenience than a part of the family. Even back then, though, I knew I had to survive. So I worked. I stayed quiet. I hid my anger and sadness because crying only made things worse. And every time Karen praised Lily while criticizing me, I told myself one day I'd leave, and they'd never have control over me again. I turned 20 on a cold February day. Birthdays were never a big deal for me growing up, and I didn't expect much. But this one felt different, like maybe I'd finally outgrown the little girl who used to cry herself to sleep. Karen, of course, made a big show of how much she'd done for Lily's birthdays over the years. Big parties, balloons, cakes shaped like unicorns. For me, nothing. I figured I'd just sneak a slice of cake and enjoy it quietly in the corner while they fawned over Lily's latest college accomplishment or whatever Karen wanted to brag about that day. But something snapped in me that evening. When they brought out the cake, a small store-bought thing Karen probably grabbed last minute, I decided to stop waiting for permission. It was my birthday after all. I reached out and cut myself a slice. Just one piece. That was all it took. Rebecca. Karen's voice rang out like a whip. Before I could even react, she stormed across the room, her face flushed with anger. How dare you touch that without asking me first? The next thing I knew, her hand connected with my cheek. Hard. The room went silent. My dad stood there, frozen, as if he couldn't process what had just happened. Lily looked embarrassed but said nothing. Tears stung my eyes, not from the slap but from the humiliation. Karen didn't stop there though. You're ungrateful, selfish, and disrespectful, she spat. You can't even follow the simplest rules. I stood there, the sting of her hand on my face, my hands shaking, and something in me shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't run to my room. I just stared at her, taking in every word, every ounce of disdain she threw at me. Happy birthday to me. After this incident, I left the home. Years later, I barely recognized the girl who used to flinch at every sharp word, who stood frozen in the living room as her stepmom berated her in front of everyone. That girl was gone. I was 26 now, living in Portland and working as a project manager at a small but thriving tech company. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I had an apartment I loved, friends who felt more like family, and a sense of peace I'd never known growing up. I hadn't spoken to my dad or Karen in years. After that birthday, I stopped pretending to care about their approval. By the time I graduated college, I cut ties entirely. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. The silence that followed was healing. I told myself they were part of my past, and I was done letting them take up space in my present. That's why I nearly dropped my coffee when I saw Karen standing in the lobby of my office building. She looked older, frailer even, as if the years had chipped away at the confident, controlling woman I once knew. But her sharp eyes and that familiar air of entitlement were still there. Rebecca, she said, her voice unnervingly soft. I wanted to turn and walk away, pretend I didn't know her. But something in her expression stopped me. Curiosity, maybe, or pity. I wasn't sure. Karen, I said, keeping my tone even. What are you doing here? She hesitated, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. I need to talk to you. I sighed and led her to a nearby cafe, keeping my guard up. We sat across from each other, the awkward silence stretching between us. Finally, she spoke. Your father and I, we hit some hard times. I raised an eyebrow. Hard times? She nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. Lily, she's gone. She moved to New York, married some big-shot lawyer, and hasn't spoken to us in over a year. That was surprising. Lily had always been the golden child, the favorite. But I kept my expression neutral. And, I prompted. Karen's eyes darted away. Your father lost his job. We had to sell the house. We're renting a small apartment now, but the rent is overdue. We're about to be evicted. I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. And you came to me because you're doing well for yourself, she said, her voice tinged with desperation. We need help, Rebecca. Just enough to get back on our feet. You owe us that much. I couldn't help but laugh, sharp, bitter, and loud enough to draw a few stares. I owe you? Really? After everything you put me through, you think I owe you anything? Karen flinched, but she didn't back down. We're family, Rebecca. I know we've had our differences, but family helps each other. Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. The audacity of her standing there, asking for help after years of treating me like dirt, was almost too much to bear. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Karen, I worked my way out of the mess you and Dad left me in. I built this life on my own, without any help from either of you. So no, I'm not giving you money. You can figure it out just like I did. Her face twisted in anger, the mask of civility slipping for a moment. You're selfish, she hissed. After everything we did for you, everything you did to me, I corrected, standing up. And if that makes me selfish, then fine. I'm selfish, but I'm also free. Don't contact me again. I walked away without looking back, my heart pounding in my chest. For the first time in years, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. It was like closing the door on a chapter I never wanted to revisit. I didn't owe them anything, not my time, not my money, not my forgiveness. And for the first time, I felt truly free. As I sat alone that evening, Karen's words replayed in my mind. You're selfish. Family helps each other. A part of me, some small, deeply buried part, felt guilty. They were struggling, and I knew what it felt like to have nothing. But every memory of being ignored, insulted, and used came flooding back, choking out any pity I might have felt. I wrestled with the knot of emotions in my chest. Anger at their audacity, guilt for turning them away, and a nagging question. Was I really as selfish as Karen claimed? But then I reminded myself of the years I'd spent trying to earn their love, only to be pushed aside. They weren't asking for help. They were demanding it, manipulating me the same way they always had. I couldn't go back to that. Not now, not ever. When Karen called me again the next week, I wasn't surprised. She launched straight into it, no pleasantries. Rebecca, you can't just turn your back on us, she said, her voice sharp but desperate. Do you know how hard this is for your father and me? We took care of you, gave you a roof over your head. I cut her off, unable to hold back a bitter laugh. Gave me a roof? You mean the roof I had to clean, along with the rest of the house, while Lily got everything handed to her on a silver platter. Come on, Karen. Her silence only fueled my anger. I could feel the years of resentment boiling to the surface, but this time, I wasn't going to suppress it. You want help? Go ask Lily. Oh wait, she's gone, isn't she? Moved on like I did because we both know the second someone stops being useful to you, they're nothing. You didn't raise me, Karen, you used me, and now you want me to do it all over again. No. Rebecca, she snapped, her tone icy now. You're being cruel. We're your family. This isn't how a daughter treats her parents. Family? I scoffed. You made it clear a long time ago that I was never part of your family, so don't you dare try to guilt me now. I owe you nothing. Her voice rose, shaking with anger. You're selfish. After everything. I laughed again, harder this time, the sound surprising even me. Selfish, maybe, but I learned from the best, didn't I? I could hear her breathing on the other end, heavy and furious. For once, I didn't care. Don't call me again, Karen. Lose my number. I'm done. And with that, I hung up, my hands trembling. Not with fear, but with something else, relief. It was over. The boundaries were set, and they weren't going to cross them again. The weight that had hung over me for so long lifted with that final call. It felt like breathing for the first time in years, deep, full breaths, untainted by guilt or fear. I wasn't bound by their expectations anymore. A few days later, I met up with some friends for dinner. We laughed, shared stories, and caught up on life. They were the kind of friends who understood me, who celebrated my victories and never judged my past. Their support was something I never had growing up, and it meant the world to me. Afterwards, I walked through the city alone, the cool night air brushing against my skin. I passed by a small art gallery and decided on a whim to stop in. As I wandered through the exhibits, I was reminded of how much I loved art, how I'd always wanted to paint, but never had the chance growing up. Now I could do whatever I wanted. I found a quiet corner in the gallery and let myself smile, genuinely, for the first time in a long while. This was my life now, built on my terms. No more manipulation. No more toxic family, just me, my freedom, and a future full of possibility. And I was proud. Proud of who I'd become, proud of the strength it took to walk away. Proud that I could finally enjoy my life fully without looking over my shoulder. My name is Vanessa Carter, and I live in Austin, Texas. I grew up in a small, close-knit family, just me, my mom, and my younger brother. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. When I met Ethan in college, he seemed like the kind of man I'd always dreamed of, kind, charming, and ambitious. I fell hard and fast for him, and within a year, we were married. It didn't take long for me to realize that marrying Ethan also meant marrying into his family, particularly his mother, Linda. Linda was a force of nature, the kind of woman who walked into a room and instantly took control. She was well respected in her field, working as a high-ranking corporate executive, and she didn't hesitate to remind everyone of her success. From the very beginning, she made it clear she thought Ethan had settled beneath him by choosing me. Linda mocked everything about me, from my decision to work as a freelance artist to the way I decorated our home. "This looks like something a child would make," she once said, holding up a painting I had poured my heart into. Ethan would laugh nervously or stay silent, never defending me. "She's just like that. he'd say later when I was in tears, as though that excused her cruelty. The worst part was how Ethan seemed to idolize his mother. No matter what she said or did, he couldn't see her flaws. He sought her approval in everything, even in our marriage. I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to earn her respect while struggling to hold onto my own identity. Still, I told myself things would get better. I loved Ethan, and I believed he loved me too. But with Linda always hovering over us, criticizing me and dictating our lives, it became clear that I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. 3 years into our marriage, I still clung to the hope that things would get better. I had convinced myself that with time, Linda might warm up to me, or at the very least, Ethan might start putting us first. But that hope was like a threadbare blanket, fragile and full of holes. On the day of our 3rd wedding anniversary, I decided to keep things simple. I baked a cake from scratch, something I had loved doing since I was a teenager. It was chocolate, Ethan's favorite, with a layer of homemade frosting I perfected after countless attempts. I decorated the dining table with candles and flowers, hoping for a quiet celebration, just the two of us. Linda was working out of the city, which gave me some relief. Ethan came home from work that evening, and for a moment, it felt like everything might be okay. He smiled at the sight of the cake and kissed me on the forehead. We sat down together, and as I lit the candles, I silently wished for a better future, for love, for understanding, for something more than what we had. But just as I was about to cut the cake, the front door slammed open. Linda stormed in, her face a mask of fury. I froze, knife in hand, as she glared at me. "How dare you cut that cake without my permission?" she shouted, her voice echoing off the walls. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Permission? This was my anniversary, my celebration with my husband. I looked at Ethan, expecting him to say something, anything to defend me. But instead, he stood up, his face pale and tense. "Linda, it's not a big deal," I started to say, but before I could finish, Ethan turned to me with a look I'll never forget. "Why do you always have to cause problems?" he snapped. And then, out of nowhere, he slapped me. The sting of his hand against my face was sharp and shocking, but it was nothing compared to the pain of his betrayal. I stumbled back, holding my cheek, my eyes filling with tears. Linda stood there, arms crossed, her expression smug. Ethan didn't stop there. He grabbed my arm and dragged me to the door, opening it wide. "You're nothing but trouble," he said, his voice cold and detached. "Get out." I stood on the doorstep, my heart shattered into pieces as he slammed the door in my face. The night was cold, but it couldn't compare to the chill I felt inside. I had given everything to this marriage, my love, my patience, my trust, and in one moment it was all thrown away. With nowhere to go and no one to turn to, I wandered the streets in a daze, clutching my phone. I called a friend who lived across town, someone who had always told me I deserved better. That night, I showed up at her door, broken and defeated, but alive. It was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it at the time. As I sat on her couch, staring blankly at the slice of cake she had cut for me, I made myself a promise. I would never let anyone treat me like that again. It had been 4 years since I left Ethan and his mother behind, and my life had transformed in ways I never thought possible. I had rebuilt myself from the ground up. I moved to Seattle, found a job that valued my creativity, and surrounded myself with people who celebrated my successes instead of tearing me down. My small apartment wasn't luxurious, but it was mine, a space filled with warmth, laughter, and peace. That's why seeing Ethan standing by my car in the parking lot of my apartment building felt like a ghost had walked out of my past. He looked different, thinner, worn down, with shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. For a moment, I just stared, unsure if I was imagining things. But then he called my name. "Vanessa, wait." I hesitated. 1,000 emotions surged through me all at once. Shock, anger, confusion. But there was no missing the desperation in his voice. Against my better judgment, I stopped. "What are you doing here?" I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. I need to talk to you," he said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "It's about my mom. She's not doing well." Linda. Of course it was about her. I should have walked away right then, but something in me needed to hear him out. Maybe it was closure I was seeking, or maybe it was the last remnants of guilt I hadn't fully let go of. "Vanessa," he continued, his tone softening, "she's sick. She lost her job a year ago because of her health, and I've been trying to take care of her. But I lost my job too. We're behind on rent, and I don't know what else to do." I stared at him stunned. The mighty Linda, who had always seemed untouchable, was now vulnerable, and Ethan, who had stood by her side, letting her tear me down, was now the one begging for help. "So, what do you want from me?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions brewing inside. "I know things ended badly between us," he said, his eyes pleading. "But you're doing well now. You've always been kind, Vanessa. I need a little help. Just enough to get back on my feet and take care of her. She's still my mom." Hearing him say those words made my stomach churn. Kind, that's what he thought of me, that I was kind enough to forget the years of pain, the insults, the betrayal. For a moment, guilt crept in. I remembered the nights I had prayed for someone to help me, to pull me out of the darkness. But then anger followed, sharp and searing. Where was this concern when I was the one suffering? Where was this desperation when his mother was mocking me, and he was standing silently by her side? "Ethan," I said slowly, forcing myself to stay calm, "do you remember our 3rd anniversary?" He blinked, caught off guard by the question. "What? Do you remember throwing me out of your house?" "Your house," I said, my voice growing firmer. "Do you remember slapping me in front of her and letting her call me worthless?" His face paled. "Vanessa, that was years ago. I was under so much pressure. She what? Made you do it? Held a gun to your head?" I interrupted, my voice sharp now. "No, Ethan. You made a choice. Over and over again, you chose her. And now you expect me to swoop in and save you both." "She's sick," he said weakly, as if that would be enough to sway me. "I'm sorry for her illness," I said, and I meant it. No one deserved to suffer like that. But pity didn't mean I owed them anything. "But I'm not your safety net. I'm not your wife anymore. You made sure of that." His face twisted into something ugly then. "You're really going to let us suffer? After everything we've been through, you're just going to turn your back? God, Vanessa, you're selfish." Selfish. The word hung in the air for a moment before I burst out laughing. I couldn't help it. It was a bitter, ironic laugh that bubbled up from the deepest part of me. "Selfish," I repeated, shaking my head. "Ethan, do you even hear yourself? Do you know how many nights I cried myself to sleep because of you? How many times I begged you to stand up for me, only to be ignored? If protecting myself and my peace makes me selfish, then so be it." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand to stop him. "This conversation is over. I'm not helping you, and if you ever show up here again, I'll call the police." I turned and walked away, my heart pounding but my head held high. For the first time, I wasn't the one apologizing or compromising. I was standing up for myself, and it felt incredible. As I closed the door to my apartment behind me, I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. Ethan and Linda were no longer my burden to bear. I was free, and I wasn't looking back. That evening, after Ethan's unexpected visit, I sat by my window with a cup of tea in hand, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The familiar ache of old wounds stirred within me, but it was quickly replaced by something stronger: relief. For years, I had let guilt, fear, and the weight of other people's expectations dictate my choices. I had spent so much time trying to prove my worth to people who were determined not to see it. But now, as the cool night air brushed against my face, I realized that chapter of my life was finally truly closed. The next morning, I met my best friend, Mia, at a cozy little cafe down the street. Mia had been my rock since I moved to Seattle, always cheering me on and reminding me of my strength. As we sipped our coffee, I told her about Ethan's visit. "And then he called me selfish," I said, rolling my eyes. Mia nearly choked on her latte. "Selfish? Oh, that's rich coming from him." We both burst out laughing, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel the weight of my past dragging me down. Instead, I felt proud of how far I had come, of the boundaries I had set, of the life I had built for myself. Later that afternoon, I headed to the community art center where I volunteered. Teaching art to kids had become one of the greatest joys of my life. Seeing their faces light up when they completed a project, hearing their laughter fill the room, it reminded me of why I had fallen in love with art in the first place. As I helped a little girl put the finishing touches on her painting, she looked up at me and said, "Miss Vanessa, you're the best." Her words warmed my heart, and I realized something important. This was my life now. A life filled with creativity, purpose, and love. Not the kind of love that demanded I shrink myself to fit into someone else's world, but the kind that allowed me to flourish as my true self. That evening, I hosted a small dinner party at my apartment. My friends gathered around the table, sharing stories, laughter, and a bottle of wine. The room was filled with warmth and light, a stark contrast to the cold, oppressive silence I had once endured in Ethan's home. As the night drew to a close, I stood by the window, looking out at the city once more. This time, I wasn't searching for answers or solace. I was simply savoring the peace I had earned, the life I had fought so hard to create. I wasn't just free from Ethan and Linda. I was free from the guilt, the self-doubt, and the need to prove myself to anyone but me. And in that freedom, I found the strength to keep moving forward, surrounded by love, laughter, and the endless possibilities of a brighter tomorrow.